So we have this session on theory, and the first talk is an invited talk on broadcast optimal two-round MPC with honest majority. And Sophia sharing this talk with Luisa and Divya, who's going to join on the stage later. So you have the stage.
All right, thank you, Claudio. So like Claudio said, I'm Sophia, and I have the privilege of giving this talk with two of my wonderful co-authors. And we also have Ivan ready to jump in and save the day, should we need a rise. All right, so we're going to talk about broadcast optimal two-round MPC in the honest majority setting. And I guess the timing is kind of awkward because we're following Yehuda, who told us that 2 rounds in practice probably isn't that important, but we're theory people. So we think that rounds are super expensive and we want as few of them as possible. And it turns out that 2 rounds is as few as is possible. So that's what we focus on. Broadcast is also expensive. So implementing broadcast in the real world would require either many rounds of peer-to-peer communication or some sort of special channel, like maybe a blockchain or a physical channel. So that's also important to minimize. And most of the MPC literature either only gives a weak notion of security for MPC or uses broadcast as like a black box in both rounds. And one notable exception to this rule is the work of Cohen et al. From Eurocrypt 2020. So they consider all of the possible patterns of using broadcast over 2 rounds. So either no broadcast is present in either round, or maybe broadcast is only present in the first round, or only in the second round, or in both. And they talk about what the best possible things you can achieve are in all of these settings for a dishonest majority. So we extend this exploration to the honest majority setting. And we sort of figure out what the best guarantees that are achievable are for all 2-round broadcast patterns. So the rest of this talk is going to look roughly like this. First, I'm going to talk about what I mean when I say the weakest kind of MPC guarantee, what the other guarantees are. Then I'm going to show you sort of many tables that summarize what's possible where. And I'll give an overview of one construction that's sort of realizable in 2 different ways by using 2 different new and exciting secret sharings that Luisa and Divya are going to tell you about. So since this is the second day of TPMPC, we've seen definitions of MPC already. We have a bunch of parties, each of them has a secret, and they talk to one another. And as a result of this conversation, they all learn some function of their secret without revealing anything else. I guess you guys haven't met these characters before. So this guy over here, that's Bruce the Bear. He is the unofficial mascot of the Aarhus Crypto Group. And his friends are Alan and Grace, the bunnies, in case you need some other names. So these guys want to run an MPC, and they want this MPC to be as secure as they can make it. So they have this like menu of 5 different guarantees that's considered in MPC literature. The strongest of these is guaranteed output delivery, where no matter what a corrupt party does, no matter what a corrupt Bruce does, he can't make it so that Alan and Grace don't get output. The only power a corrupt Bruce has is using arbitrary inputs on his own behalf. All of the other 4 guarantees. Great. So we were just about to talk about all of the different guarantees that Alan, Grace, and Bruce can hope to achieve. So the strongest is guaranteed output delivery, which we already talked about, and all of the other ones, they do allow a corrupt party to prevent honest parties from getting the output. They all have some notion of allowing a corrupt party to abort the computation. So the weakest guarantee is selective abort, where a corrupt Bruce can sort of decide which honest party should learn the output and which one shouldn't. Unanimous abort gives the honest parties a stronger guarantee. So a corrupt ruse can still prevent them from getting the output, but a corrupt ruse has to decide whether all of them don't or all of them do get the output. So honest parties have some sort of unanimity guarantee. In identifiable abort, we still have this unanimity guarantee, and we additionally ensure that all honest parties will agree on some cheater to blame if something goes wrong. And then we have fairness. That's our last one. And fairness is kind of incomparable to identifiable abort, because in a fair secure computation, honest parties don't necessarily learn who's responsible. But we have the guarantee that if honest parties don't learn the output, then neither do corrupt parties. And if a corrupt party does learn the output, then so do all of the honest parties. All right, so now that we know what we could strive for, we can talk about what's actually possible here. And what's possible depends a lot on what resources we have available. So to start with, let's consider the two classic scenarios where either we do have broadcast in both rounds, or we have broadcast in neither round and we only have peer-to-peer channels. And we can subdivide this further. In addition to considering the availability of a broadcast channel, we can consider whether or not the parties have access to a public key infrastructure, where before the computation starts, they have one another's public keys, which they can use for signatures, encryption, whatever else. And when a PKI is not available, we assume that the first round is actually public, that the adversary can snoop on everything honest parties send to one another. And this is sort of to reflect the reality in which we live, which is we use public keys and encryption to get privacy, typically. Okay, so when we do have a PKI, the situation looks great. So Gordon et al. Show us how to get the best possible guarantee, which is guaranteed output delivery, and which implies all of the other guarantees. So we are really happy with 2 rounds of broadcast and with a PKI. If we don't have a PKI, we can use the work of Cohen et al. From 2 years ago to get identifiable abort. And this is with a small caveat, because they do need private communication in round 1, but we can tweak that easily using a trick that Divya is going to talk about in a little bit. It turns out that nothing else is possible without a PKI, even with 2 rounds of broadcast. So Patra and Ravi and Gordon et al. Show that with 1 corrupt party out of 3, you can't get fairness or guaranteed output delivery. And Gennaro et al. Show the same for 2 or more corruptions, and we complete the picture by showing that even with 2 rounds of broadcast, if we don't have a PKI, even for a single corruption, fairness and guaranteed output delivery are off the table. I mean that parties don't have one another's public keys before we start the 2 rounds.
So everybody kind of knows who the names, but
yeah. So it's a little bit of a cheat because we assume authenticated channels, even though we don't have public keys. Like parties, we have party 1 through. Yeah. We have pipes to one another, which aren't private, but are authenticated in some sense.
And public key means that
public key means we can do fancier things.
We can do the assumption. It means that there is a public whatever file there that we can post.
Yeah. And that this was all done before we start our round budget of 2. Okay, so that kind of completes the picture for 2 rounds of broadcast. If we have 0 rounds of broadcast, but we have a PKI, Ananth et al. Show that we can do the weakest guarantee. We can get selective abort. And this is where it gets a little bit weird, because we have 1 special case where for 1 corrupt party and 3 or more honest parties, we can do everything, according to Ishai et al. But if we're not in that 1 special case, we can't do anything other than selective abort. Without a PKI, it's a little bit simpler. There's no special case. We just have our one selective abort construction, which is the tweaked construction of Cohen et al. And nothing else is possible here. And Patra et al. Show this for one corrupt party out of 3, and we extend this even to the case where fewer than a third of the parties are corrupt. Okay, so if you only care about the classics, about like either we have broadcast or we don't have broadcast, this is the picture. We also study the case where we have broadcast in just the first round or just the second round. So in the just the first round situation, if we have a PKI, everything is possible. And if we don't have a PKI, then the construction of Cohen et al. Works, and for selective abort, but unanimous abort and stronger is totally off the table. And when broadcast is available only in the second round, we kind of think this is the toughest one to think about, because we have this one round where we could have inconsistent communication, and then we have only one round in which to synchronize. So all of the results from the case where we don't have any broadcast, all of the constructions carry over to this setting. And we show that additionally, outside of the special case where we only have one corrupt party, we can still do identifiable abort if we have a PKI for any honest majority. But if we don't have a PKI, it becomes important whether fewer than 1/3 of the parties are corrupt or more than a third, or a third or more of the parties are corrupt. If a third or more of the parties are corrupt, we can't have identifiable abort. And if fewer than a third of the parties are corrupt, we can. And these identifiable abort constructions are the ones that we're going to talk about in the rest of this talk. So I'll give you a quick sketch of what the overall construction structure is, and then we're going to have Luisa and Divya tell you about cool new secret sharing stuff. So we use the blueprint of Cohen and Company from 2 years ago, which takes any protocol that uses broadcast in both rounds and compiles it into a protocol that only needs broadcast in the second round. So we take this protocol that uses 2 rounds of broadcast, and we could just try to run it in our new setting where we don't have broadcast in the first round. We could just have everyone send their round 1 messages from this other protocol over peer-to-peer channels. But it turns out that that doesn't quite work, because the round 1 messages can now be inconsistent. And if honest parties respond with round 2 messages based on different round 1 messages, this could reveal too much information to the adversary. So we could try something else. We could just wait until we have this reliable broadcast channel to say anything, but then we run out of space. We wanted to do this in 2 rounds. We didn't do anything in the first round. Now we don't really have time to say our second round messages. So we really do need to start in the first round. We need to say whatever it is we wanted to say in the first round But we can't just respond with the second round messages we would have sent in the protocol that depends on broadcast in both rounds. What we can do is we can have every party garble their circuit that computes their second round message. And they can broadcast this garbled circuit reliably in the second round, and then everyone can evaluate the garbled circuit to find that party's round 2 message and use those round 2 messages either to compute the output or to figure out who to blame, because remember, we want to blame someone if we don't get output. Okay, this garbled circuit is going to need to take all of the round 1 messages in as input, because parties' second messages depend on the messages they received in the first round. And garbled circuits use labels for evaluation. So we need to somehow distribute labels corresponding to the bits in the first round messages. And our problem before was that our first round messages might be inconsistent. We don't have broadcast. So our mission now is to distribute these labels in such a way that everyone gets the same label for every bit of input for the garbled circuits. And we're going to do this using the fancy new secret sharing schemes that Divya and Luisa will tell you about. And the job of these secret sharing schemes is pretty heavy, because we know that garbled circuits are only secure as long as only one label is known for every input wire. So we need to make sure that in whatever way our garblers share the labels, only one label out of every pair is reconstructed and learned. Okay, so Divya and Luisa will talk about this magical mechanism, this secret sharing, and they'll focus on one pair of labels belonging to Grace the bunny, who garbled a circuit and wants to share these labels. And we're going to talk about one bit of one first round message. And this bit is going to be some bit belonging to Bruce the bear. So on that note, I will hand things over to Luisa.
Okay. So let me recap the scenario just very fast. We have the first round that is peer-to-peer. The second round is over broadcast. Grace wants us two labels or token, one for the bit 0 and one for the bit 1. And there is one single message of Bruce, and this Bruce has, just for simplicity, a message of 1 bit. Now what we want is that our player, in the end of the protocol, or they reconstruct the correct token based on the bits of Bruce, or nothing is or someone is identified. Okay? So how are we gonna do this? Well, let's remind ourselves that here we are using a PKI, so we can use signature. Moreover, we are gonna use our new tool that is called one or nothing secret share. So let me say to you, what is this one or nothing secret share? Well, Grace will be our dealer, and then there will be a bunch of parties that can vote for which share they want to reconstruct. Namely, if they want to reconstruct the share for the bit 0, they're going to vote for 0. Otherwise, they're going to vote for 1, or we give them also a third option, which means they can abstain and vote for nothing. So let's now slowly go over our protocol and what are the possible scenarios. And so we will design the properties that this one or not secret share needs to have in order to be compiled in our framework that Sophia was talking about. So let's analyze the first scenario where Bruce is honest. So if Bruce is honest, he's going to send the same messages over peer-to-peer channel to everybody. But at this point, we can also ask to sign this message since we are having a PKI. Okay, this is very important because this prevents the malicious party to actually claim that they received other message from Bruce. So the signature prevents this type of attack. But actually, what the malicious party can do, they can just say, well, I didn't receive anything in the first round. Well, but now let's see the point of view of an honest party. Well, an honest party doesn't know if Bruce sent inconsistent messages or if it was someone maliciously claiming that they didn't receive anything. But in this scenario that we are considering, Bruce is honest. So actually, we should reconstruct the bit for which the honest party are voting for. And here comes the first property that we need, which is correctness. Namely, if n-3 party voted for the same bit and the other one just abstained, then the correct bit needs to be reconstructed. So that's the correctness property. Well, one more thing is that if Grace is malicious, actually vote and share happen in the first round, and this is over broadcast. So since these two things happen simultaneously, a malicious Grace cannot do anything to prevent the honest party to cast their vote. Okay, until now we were in a scenario where Bruce is honest and he was behaving correctly. But what happened actually when Bruce is malicious? Well, the first thing is that he can send inconsistent messages. Yes, he will be caught in the second round, but actually this doesn't prevent him to actually learn some more information. Okay, it may be possible. Until now, there is no property that doesn't say that actually, if Bruce does this behavior, both tokens are reconstructed. And let's remind ourselves what these tokens are. Well, these tokens are the label of the garbled circuit. So the garbled circuit security will be completely violated if this happens. So that's why we need another important property that is called contradiction privacy, which is the following. As soon as two honest parties voted for two different bits, and these are different for both, then none of the token is reconstructed. So, but as before, Bruce can do something else. He can just say, well, I don't send some, I send consistent bit to some of the party, and from some other party, I just don't send anything. So if this happens, actually, again, he can try to learn something about both the labels. What we are going to ask here is that if no honest party voted for 0, then if no honest party voted for 1, sorry, then the token, the green token, is not going to be revealed. It's completely secret from the point of view. It's completely hidden from Bruce. Okay, this is our last property, which is called privacy. So now I am briefly gonna say actually how we construct this tool. Okay, so first of all, share and reconstruct happen reconstruct up and voting, sorry, happen simultaneously in the second round, which is overvoted. So one more thing is that we are making use of a PKI, so we can actually make advantage of these things and require that there are shared keys between the parties. In particular, we can have 3 keys for each party, one for each type of vote of the party. So in particular, if the party wants to vote for 0, they're gonna use the blue key. If they want to use, if they're gonna want to vote for 1, they're gonna use the green key. And if they want to abstain, they are gonna use the pink key. So more concretely, Grace knows all these keys, while each triplet is each party has 1 triplet. So the first player has the first 3 keys, the second player has the second keys, and so on. The second triplet of keys, and so on. Okay. Okay, what Grace is gonna do now? Well, let's focus on the single bit, and let's focus on the blue token. Well, Grace is gonna additively secret sharing this token. So since the share happened over broadcast, well, we need a way to actually hide this share. Well, what we are gonna do, we are gonna encrypt them. And how we are gonna encrypt them? Well, we are encrypting them using the corresponding key that the player can use for voting. So in particular, for the first share, we are going to encrypt using the key of the first player, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the second box will be encrypted with respect to the key of the second player. Okay, and this is the first level share. But now we are going to share this share again using a threshold secret sharing. To see how this works, let's focus on a particular share number 5. So we are going to threshold this share. And we obtain 5 shares, okay? So intuitively, these shares are useful for when the party abstains. So we are going to encrypt this share, and we are going to encrypt them using the pink key. Moreover, we are double encrypting them using the keys of the all other players. So for the first share, it will be the key of the first player. For the second player, it will be for the second box, it will be the second key, and so on and so forth. And it will correspond to the blue key because we are sharing the token, the blue token, the token for 0. Okay, we are gonna do the same for the green token. And now let me explain to you how share and vote works. Well, after that Grace did all of this, she's just gonna broadcast all these boxes. While for voting, well, the party expressed their preferences, broadcasting the corresponding keys. Okay. Now I will just briefly explain how correctness of this one or nothing secret sharing works. Well, in this example, we have 5 parties and 2 at most can be malicious because we are in an honest majority set. So let's say that the first 3 parties broadcasted the correct key. So already at this point, the 3 first level shares are available to all the parties. Okay, but we are still missing the last 2 shares. Let's focus on the 5th share again. Well, the 5th player broadcasted a pink key. Okay, so we actually have the pink key for like all the boxes, but we also have the first 3 blue keys. So we can actually decrypt the first 3 shares. And since this is a threshold secret sharing, we can reconstruct the 5th share. Okay. Well, we can do the same also for the first share. And at this point, we can just reconstruct the correct blue token. So that's how correctness works. Well, for privacy and contradiction privacy, I am not gonna go into the details, but basically, we can just argue that the adversary does never have enough keys to reconstruct the first level share. So summing up, if we practice one or nothing secret sharing plus signature in the blueprint that Sophia was saying, then we are going to obtain a construction for an honest majority setting where the first round is peer-to-peer and the second is over broadcast, which achieves identifiable apport. So now I am passing the word to Divya, which will talk about a setting where we are just basing on a CRS, we require super honest majority, and we don't use private.
Okay, so now we are in a setting where we only have a CRS and we don't have PKI or private channels. So this is what I'm going to talk about. So if you remember that one of the places where we were using a PKI was that when Bruce was distributing the bit over the peer-to-peer channel in the first round, we were also tagging it with signatures. And this made it very easy for us to catch Bruce if he distributes inconsistent bits to a pair of honest parties. But now that we don't have PKI, so we don't have signatures, we cannot catch Bruce when he does such a misbehavior. So the best that we can try to do is maybe over the second round of broadcast, we just try to check whether sufficient number of parties are in agreement with respect to the bit that Bruce has sent in the first round. So now what do I mean by sufficient number of parties? Of course, I cannot demand support from more than n-t parties because even if Bruce was honest, the T-corrupt people can always say that they got 1 instead of 0. So even an honest Bruce is getting support only from n-t parties. So maybe this is the maximum support that I can shoot for. And in such a case, when we cannot identify who is corrupt, we want the token for 0 to be reconstructed. So here we need a slightly different kind of correctness guarantee than the one that Luisa was mentioning. So in the previous case, if people vote for different things, then nothing was being reconstructed. But in this case, even though people are voting for different things, I would want that the token for 0 is reconstructed if n-t parties vote for 0. Okay. So that's why we introduced this new variant called one or nothing secret sharing with intermediaries. So similar to the previous construction, this also has two levels of secret sharing. So say we begin with the first level where Grace, the dealer, she is splitting the blue token into these first level shares. And let's just focus on one of these first level shares, which was meant for the receiver R. Now, the question is that we want to see how the dealer can transfer this first level share to the receiver in a verifiable and reliable way. So this is a bit tricky to do when we don't have a PKI, because the dealer can always say that I sent this share, and the receiver can always claim that she didn't get it, and it's not clear who is lying. So that's why we take the help of these other parties that we call as intermediaries. And how they help is that now the dealer will actually be splitting these first level shares, SR, again into these threshold shares. And she will give these sub shares to the intermediaries, who will then give it to the receiver. Now, why is this better than the dealer directly giving it to the receiver? That's because when she was directly giving it, she could always blame the receiver. But now, if she doesn't want to be caught, then she needs to have the support of N-T intermediaries. And that's what you would exploit to do this transfer. So this is how we are saying that the first level shares will be transferred. And you see that this in itself has two parts, that the first is from the dealer to the intermediary, and the second is from the intermediary to the receiver. So it would make sense to do it in sequence, one after the other, because the same subshares are being transferred. But unfortunately, we cannot do that, because if we had to do the first part in the first round, then our first round was over the peer-to-peer channel, which we're assuming to be not private. So that's why we don't want to exchange these subshares in the first round. So we just want to exchange some kind of public information over the peer-to-peer channel. And so we choose to exchange the public keys. So that's what is happening in our first round of the peer-to-peer broadcast. We are just exchanging the public keys in the peer-to-peer channel. So now this means that we are just left with one single round of broadcast, and somehow we need to make both these parts of transfer happen in that single round of broadcast. So let's see how this works out. So in the first round of peer-to-peer channel, say the dealer has obtained these 4 public keys of the intermediaries, and they have the corresponding secret keys. Since it's only over the peer-to-peer channel, so this may be inconsistent if some of the parties are corrupt. So now what the dealer will do is she will simply encrypt these threshold or second level shares using the public key of the intermediaries. And she will be broadcasting this in that single round of broadcast. So she has done her first part of the transfer. So now the intermediaries need to somehow transfer this, but they have to do it even before they see the ciphertext. So in some sense, they need to transfer their decryption capability to the receiver. So this is the notion that we refer to as transferable encryption, because they have the ability to decrypt, and somehow they need the receiver to be able to decrypt it, and they don't have the access to the ciphertext yet. So a simple way that you can do this is make even the receiver exchange the public key over the peer-to-peer channel in the first round. And now what the intermediaries can do is they can encrypt their secret key using the public key of the receiver. And they can broadcast this. So this set of ciphertext can be broadcasted simultaneously along with the first set of ciphertexts. So effectively, this helped, because now what the receiver can do is he can use his secret key to decrypt the second set of ciphertexts, get the secret keys of the intermediaries, and then move on to decrypt the first set of ciphertexts, get the subshares, and everything is good. So this kind of transferable encryption notion, we can also apply to the construction of Cohen and others. If we want that even in their construction, we don't want to use private channels in the first round and just exchange public information. So let's see what happens if some of the people are corrupt and they don't do this public key exchange in a consistent manner. Say that we are in a situation where no one is caught. Particularly, it means that the dealer is not caught and she has the support of at least N-T intermediaries, that is 3 of the intermediaries in this case. So say she is in agreement with the first 3 of them, but there is a conflict regarding the public key of the 4th intermediary. So this means that these ciphertexts are now useless, because she is using a public key and the intermediary has used a totally inconsistent secret key. So these ciphertexts are not useful to us anymore. Now, for the same reason that no one is caught, particularly the receiver is also not caught. So she also needs the support of n minus t, that is 3 intermediaries, and say that she has the support of the first, second, and the fourth one, meaning that she is in conflict with the third intermediary who is saying that he got some other public key over the peer-to-peer channel. So now this ciphertext also becomes useless. So effectively, only 2 of the subshares have been transferred successfully. But that is enough if our second level threshold was just t equal to 1. So if you want to look at it more generally, if no one is caught, it means that there is a set of n minus t intermediaries who are happy with the dealer, and there's a set of n minus t intermediaries who are happy with the receiver. So there are, at least in the worst case, n minus 2t of them who are happy with both. And those are the subshares that are going to be useful to us. And if your n minus 2t is more than the second level threshold, then that is enough to recover this first level share. And we also need the second level threshold to be at least t, because we don't want the t corrupt intermediaries to be able to get the first level share meant for an honest party. So this is the reason why this idea works out for n greater than 3t, which is also the condition which turns out to be necessary to get identifiable abort in the setting where you just have a CRS. So now let me just fill in the gaps of this construction. So this is the construction of the one or nothing secret sharing with intermediary that works when n is greater than 3t. So the first step is that you're creating these first level shares, and that is actually happening with threshold n minus t minus 1. Now, each of these first level shares will again be threshold shared with threshold n minus 2t minus 1, which is greater than or equal to t when n is greater than 3t. And on these second level shares, we will be applying the transferable encryption that we saw. And the same thing happens even for the green token for b equal to 1. And again, the transferable encryption will be applied to that. So now, as a part of the share algorithm, what the dealer has to do is he simply has to broadcast these subshares with respect to the public key of the intermediaries. And then what every person has to do as an intermediary for every other receiver is that they have to broadcast their keys using the public key of the receiver. And as a part of the vote algorithm, this doesn't change much from the what Luisa explained. You still need to just broadcast your relevant key, either the blue or green, depending on whether your vote is 0 or 1. And you can still vote for bot, but in that case, there is no need for another pink key. In this case, it still works out. So we claim that this construction has the property that if n minus t parties vote for 0 and no one is identified, then we say that the 0 token will be reconstructed. So let's just quickly go through why this works out. So say that this is an honest, okay, it is some receiver who has voted for 0. So he has given out his blue key. So by the arguments that we saw earlier, you will have at least n minus, if no one is caught, you will have at least n minus 2t subshares, which will be transferred successfully. And that's why this person's first level share will be reconstructed and known by all. And our assumption is that there are at least n minus t voting for 0. So for each of their first level shares, we will be able to get it. And since the threshold is set in a way that this is higher than that, so we know that the token for 0 can be reconstructed. The next property is that of privacy, which says that if fewer than n minus 2t parties vote for 1, then nothing about the token for 1 is revealed. So this follows from an observation that if an honest receiver is voting for 0, then the adversary cannot learn anything about her first level green share. And that's because the adversary only knows t of the subshares, and we have set the second level threshold in a way that that's not enough. So effectively, the only first level green shares that the adversary would know are those for the honest parties who vote for 1 and also for the t corrupt parties. So effectively, he has access to fewer than n minus t first level shares, which is not enough to reconstruct the green token. And lastly, I just want to point that we don't have this notion of contradiction privacy here, because in this case, if people vote for different things, still, maybe you reconstruct one of them, but still the guarantee is that you reconstruct at most one of them. So it's still a one or nothing secret sharing. So this is kind of implied by privacy, because if you were saying that the token for both 0 and 1 were reconstructed, it means that you have n-2t honest parties voting for 1 and a disjoint set of n-2t honest parties voting for 0. And this will contradict our assumption that n is greater than 3t, and that is worked out in the kernel. So privacy actually implies that at most one secret is reconstructed. So we tying it up with the MPC, it means that at most one label for the Gaba circuit can be obtained. So all the arguments work out same as the previous construction. So if you just plug in this new secret sharing instead of the previous one, then you will get an identifiable abort construction in the CRS setting with n greater than 3t. So now I will hand it over to Sophia to just conclude and talk about some more things we explored.
I think we might be a little over time, so I'll try to keep it short. Okay, so this is the picture I showed you earlier. In black are the two constructions that Luisa and Divya described. So the picture is more or less complete. Like this entire table is filled out. And we really liked working on this. So we were kind of sad to see this done. So we decided to ask, what happens if the peer-to-peer channels, the peer-to-peer rounds are asynchronous? So what if the adversary can arbitrarily schedule all of the messages in those rounds? It turns out that this is what happens. So if the peer-to-peer round, the asynchronous peer-to-peer round is the second one, nothing really changes. We can still do everything we could do before. But if the asynchronous peer-to-peer round is first, the picture is kind of bleak, like we can't do anything. So this led us to consider a slightly weakened notion, a new notion of asynchrony. So instead of letting the adversary schedule all of the messages arbitrarily, we restrict the adversary to arbitrarily delaying or dropping up to m of the messages that any one party sends. So this is that party's muteness threshold. And similarly, the adversary can delay or drop up to d incoming messages for every party. This is the deafness threshold. Okay, so I've shown you a lot of tables. I'm very sorry for what I'm about to show you. I'll show it for 2 seconds. I just think it's very pretty. I'm not going to go into what it is. Ta-da! It's a graph with D and M on the axis. It shows what's possible. I'm going to take it away now. There it goes. Okay, so we explored this asynchrony with mute and deaf parties, specifically for these like 2 round MPCs with 1 round of broadcast. But we kind of think that this new notion of asynchrony might be interesting in other contexts within the MPC realm. So that's something we're looking forward to playing with more. I'll just leave off with this slide, and thank you guys for listening. Questions?
Thanks for the note. So in this model where we treat broadcast as a platform, do we allow the broadcast round to consist of multiple rounds inside, or does it have to be really a single round?
So we don't consider how the broadcast is realized. We look at it as a black box. So we don't really use the fact that it might be over multiple rounds, if that's the question.
In that case, since we have P2P channels, why can't we implement broadcast P2P so that we have 2 rounds of broadcast? I mean, what would be a use case where we must have only P2P in the first?
So I'm the wrong person to ask about use cases, but if you want to use peer-to-peer rounds to implement 2 rounds of broadcast, this will take you much longer than using peer-to-peer rounds to implement 1 round of broadcast, which is why if we think rounds are expensive, then it makes sense to try to minimize the number of times we do this, right?
Ah, okay. Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
To comment to that, I think one scenario you could imagine would be one where, let's say, we exchange messages in one peer-to-peer round, and then we send some broadcast up to a blockchain. It will appear there eventually. We have to pay for this, but that's fine. because we only set a small amount. So,
It's more expensive. We want to use the one.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be one case where this kind of instructions would apply. Makes sense.
These results, are they in the information theoretic setting or the?
No, we use a lot of computational assumptions. There's signatures hidden away in various places. I think Divya mentioned them.
Okay, so like in the security, you said you prove privacy and correctness separately, but in the computation, don't you need
So I think Divya was talking about the definitions of the one or nothing secret sharing, which we define in a game-based way, and we have the definitions separately. And we then use these properties to prove the security of our MPC.
Last question, yeah?
So could you say more about the assumptions and do the assumptions change the picture? Like maybe if I assume obfuscation, I could get fairness, but if I only assume one of my functions, I don't get fairness. Does it change the picture?
Oh, that's a good question. So we actually had a bunch of constructions from obfuscation, but then we improved our upper bounds that don't use it. So right now there's no obfuscation in the picture. There's only very standard assumptions in there. We haven't looked at what happens if we lift the public key crypto assumptions.
It makes it hard to use the PKI.
It kind of does, right?
They're only one way.
Let's thank Sophia, Divya, and Luisa again.